love goes on, softly on. So don't be sighing or crying. Still live with our
Hi, welcome to another podcast from Lawyers, Guns, and Money. I'm Scott R. Kaufman.
I'm Stephen Atwell.
And we're going to be talking about The Mountain and the Viper, the latest episode of Game of Thrones. Lovely episode it was. Nothing shocking or surprising. Everything.
Yeah, definitely nothing mind-blowing.
No. That's a terrible pun. Jesus.
It's been a long day.
All right, so we begin the episode, just to jump right in Molestown, where the wildlings are running around like crazy people. And I think it's really significant that the actual first words uttered in this episode are the reigns of Castamere. Because if the episode's going to begin with that...
I thought it was more just a joke that there seems to be only two songs in the show. It's either the Reigns of Castamere or the other one.
Well, I mean, there's that, but it's actually the first line of dialogue is the Reigns of Castamere. And it's just, oh, well, we hear that, as we've spoken of previously. We know what to expect. And then we get it, exactly, right?
I think it's a bit of a stretch. But, I mean, the interesting thing here is that, Ygritte has, this kind of, she's not as bad as the other one's moment where she spares Gilly and her baby in a scene that will, not at all become poignant or ironic later on.
No, and I mean it's a really well set up scene. I mean you have this. Well, one, we have this sort of nameless or lame prostitute who's followed around until we get to Gilly. So there's this sort of whole sense of vulnerability, which is something that Jon Snow has been talking about in the past couple episodes. Just how vulnerable the people are because they're not within the wall. They have they're about to get squashed by an army of hundreds of thousands on one side, and they're being flanked on the other. And Jon Snow keeps saying there's no mercy, there's no mercy, there's no mercy, and yet the one person who actually shows some mercy, is his former lover. And I think it's...
Right, although, I wonder how far that goes, because at the end of the day, there's still blood dripping from the floorboards. Ygritte is like, being the one nice wildling raider, has a certain, element to it of, well, you're still part of an institution, that is murdering, hapless civilians.
Yeah, I mean, she doesn't come out well, but she comes out slightly better, which is all I think we could, sort of expect for her. And we should note, for the record, because we're both doing it, I can tell, we've been having technical difficulties, so if we sound like we're trying to squeeze as many words as we possibly can into the short time, that's why. I had a problem understanding a few things he said because of how quickly you were saying them, and then I realized I'm doing the same thing. And yeah, I did forensics in high school, so if I'm going to start talking fast, there's a real possibility I could talk really fast, and I don't think it makes a very, very good podcast, so we'll try not to do that. So the scene then shifts, and this is the other thing with the way that they were setting up the comparison of Gilly and Jon, was that we shift immediately to the wall itself, from Molestown to the wall, where everyone is miserable.
Yeah, although, I mean, and it's at one and the same time a very hopeless situation in that, it's 100,000 versus 102, and yet you get the interesting sort of little moment where Dolorous Ed, I mean, a man who is so without hope that it's literally his nickname,
yeah.
emphasizes that, Gilly might still be alive, Because if you can survive Craster, then you can survive anything.
Yeah.
And speaking of survival, we sort of go from there to this kind of, very different kind of feeling scene with the Unsullied and Missandei and Grey Worm bathing.
And it's not just Grey Worm bathing, but as I noted in my recap, it's Grey Worm in what is one of the iconic shots from Apocalypse Now, rising from the water. You know, and as a soldier in a foreign land, I mean, there's a lot of actual resonance, and I kept looking all
Except
week
he's
for.
a soldier in his own land.
Well, is he in his own land?
Yes, he's a liberated slave in Slaver's Bay.
Well, but I mean, that's not where he was originally from, is I guess what I meant.
Right, but I think there's a slight difference between. I mean, I know there are people who like to make this imperialist. You know, Danny is George W. Bush, Slaver's Bay is Iraq argument, but
Oh, wow.
I think in this case, what we're seeing here are two ex-slaves negotiating what life is for them is going to be like amongst the wreckage of a slave society. So, to me, this is more. Hold on, I'm momentarily blanking on the title. But what was the movie with based on the Maya Angelou novel with Oprah and Danny Glover? Beloved. This is more Beloved than it is Apocalypse Now. At least that's the way I see it.
Well, but I guess the comparison, I wasn't comparing it to an imperialist project, and I'm actually not familiar with the Bush arguments. I was comparing it to the broken U.S. soldier, broken slave in a foreign land doing.
Right, but I mean, Apocalypse Now is about Vietnam as the Belgian Congo, right?
Yeah. I guess I was looking at more in the Vietnam context than the Joseph Conrad context.
Right, but the argument about Vietnam was that it was an imperialist war.
Yeah. It's just I guess most of the stuff that I've worked on with Vietnam is always from the soldier's perspective, because I taught a class on Vietnam narratives, and they were largely about the narratives of soldiers and former soldiers. Less sort of a.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, Well, yeah, okay. So anyway, they have this kind of interesting moment in which Grey Worm both sort of is embarrassed about watching but can't stop himself, and Missandei is both kind of covering herself but not running away and returning his gaze, and it is sort of this ambivalence carries through into the later scene in which Missandei is talking with Daenerys in that she's not sure how she feels about this, and they're not sure about what kind of a relationship is possible for someone who's possibly been 100% castrated. What kind of desires are possible? What kind of life is possible?
And one thing I wanted to ask you before we jump to the Missandei and Grey Worm scene, because I figured you'd have something to say about this. The Danny braiding her hair, that just struck me as a really interesting detail. I don't know if and I really have nothing more to say about it than I've thought about that and still don't know quite what to make of it.
I think what they were trying to get was that it's a more domestic activity, and it's a activity of equals, right? I mean, Daenerys has been spending a lot of time as a queen, and here's a girlfriend in the sense of she's offering romantic advice, she's relating as an equal to Missandei.
Okay, that's really interesting given what she'll do later with Jorah, but we can discuss that then, because it seems like she's actually dividing her life and in a sort of interesting way. But we'll get to that, I guess, in a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe it's the question of trust. Like Missandei is someone who clearly she feels that she can trust. So where there can be space in that relationship for this kind of informal, more equal relationship. Whereas
I think you're absolutely right. It just occurred to me as you were saying that this is a sort of typical scene between a king and or queen and their nominal underling, right? We have the shaving with Renly, right, earlier. And then this is sort of getting parodied with Reek and Bolton. Okay, no, this makes sense. They're doing something with all of these.
Right. And then we get this, interesting moment in the throne room in which, in a different context, a more open, official, public context, they're trying to work out what this means. And, they're ultimately coming to the expression, to one another that there is,
mutual interest,
tenderness there, if they're not exactly sure where it's all going to. And then, we get another sort of tonal shift from there to Moat Cailin.
Well, before we go there, the one thing I should note is that scene, if you're interested in film theory and want to know how the Wonder Years worked, if you're old enough to know what the Wonder Years is, that scene was filmed like they just took the director's Bible from the Wonder Years, and they used it to film that scene between Misaka and Grey Worm. It's the same sort of awkward pausing, awkward framing, and ill-timed reverse shots that you see in that scene. But now, yes, let's move to another great naming ceremony.
Right, and you get this fascinating dialogue. First of all, I thought this scene was wonderfully written. There's so much subtlety in language. The description of the Kraken is something that is very strong in the water but doesn't do well on land, and this sort of question of what are you really? Who are you? You're Reek. How long are you Reek? For all time until you're dead. So one thing, just sort of to add a little bit of outside knowledge here, just because I wasn't sure how clear it was to people who are only show watchers. The reason that Moat Cailin is important is that it is a castle that dominates the one road leading up to the north from the south, and the rest of the land on either side of it is this impenetrable swampy bog. So it's kind of a bottleneck, but at the same time, and it's a bottleneck that has never been taken from the south. And the way that the Ironborn took this Moat Cailin was that they attacked from the sea and sort of sailed in from the north side of the castle. But they got there, they're dying of disease, they're dying of hunger, and what doesn't get shown in the show is that they're facing a guerrilla warfare of their own from the Crannogmen, who the Reed children come from.
Okay, you broke up a little there right at the end. Could you just repeat maybe the last sentence?
Just that the something that doesn't come across in the show is that one of the things that the Ironborn inside Moat Cailin have been dealing with is a guerrilla war from the people that the Jojen and Mira Reed come from.
Now you're just trying to make me think more about Vietnam. Anyway, no, I agree. This and the one thing before we go anywhere else, I do want to agree with you about. I think this is actually the best episode of the show this season for book readers. I know we said that last week too, but I would argue that there are so many scenes that are so well done, both this one and then the one that it leads into with Sansa, which are just exquisitely written in terms of the pacing and the dialogue.
And just some very clever choices. Like, for example, the fact that when Theon rides out to Moat Cailin and they say, "Who are you?" that they cut away from him actually saying his name is just like a really nice way of kind of putting a button on this kind of central issue hanging over the scene of, can Reek play Theon? Can he pretend to be someone that he clearly isn't anymore? And then there's this whole sort of double game going on here. Once he gets inside the Moat Cailin, he's using things that he knows from his past life matter, like I'm your prince by the drowned god, that which is dead can never die, etc. Looking for these responses that he knows how to evoke. But at the same time,
I think someone.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it was Alyssa. It might have been Alyssa who compared that to Mick Jagger going on stage and starting to sing "Sympathy for the Devil," and just the audience sort of not responding. Like they know it's right, but it just sounds wrong. I think that was the comparison she made. But
okay.
But someone made it that this is an adequate performance that only works in as much as it does because it's expected to, because of the whole formal structure that he enters into when he starts saying, that which is dead can never die, and once it becomes rich.
I also think it has to do with the interests of the people involved, right? At the end of the day, in this scene, right, Theon breaks down under interrogation. That when when Koenig asks him, "Who are you really?" that he starts to mumble over and over again, "I am Reek, I am Reek, I am Reek." And it's only because the other men in that fort desperately want to leave, desperately want to believe that what's written on the paper means that they get to go home. It's there. All of this sort of amazing phrasing, like where he says, "I'm coming to you in good faith as your fellow Ironborn. He will be as just and fair with you as he was with me." This is all lies upon lies, but it works because the people already want to believe it.
Well, or it might be the truth. He might actually be saying, "I think they'll be as fair with you as they were with me," and that might be his way of kind of saying, "Yeah, they're gonna."
But he knows he's not coming in good faith.
Yeah. No, absolutely not.
Yeah. And we see, like, the moment that this guy gives in and believes, there's this hard cut to him being, his flayed body, as the proof of, what the intentions of the Boltons actually are. And I just want to flag something, because we'll get to it when we go back to the Boltons. But this issue of tradition, that for Ramsay, the tradition of being a Bolton is flaying. It's just something to stick in your back pocket for
now. Not literally. We don't want you to flay anything and literally stick it in your back pocket. From there, we move on to the scene that I think everyone has sort of, basically come in and said, "Oh, I think it might be possible for us to like Sansa." This sort of...
Yeah. If this didn't, nothing ever will, because it really was a magnificent performance by Sophie Turner. And, you said that you think this is the best episode for book readers. I think partly because, this shocked the hell out of us.
Well,
this was not what a lot of us were expecting. And that makes for good TV.
Yeah, and it means that whole swaths of the books are now irrelevant. I almost sort of wondered if...
Well, I mean, whole swaths is a bit generous. There's a couple chapters that they've skipped.
Yeah. But a much larger deception.
Sorry, go ahead.
What was a much larger deception has been boiled down into a single, 11-minute long block. But what I loved is that they made her surprise, both the judge and jury and her own defense attorney. I mean,
yeah. And what's interesting is if we look at this in comparison to the how incredibly confident she is in her story than Theon was in his. And it really does show you confidence is everything. That in Theon's case, he was trying to pretend in front of an audience that desperately wanted to believe and barely made it barely made it. Whereas in this case, Sansa is dealing with a very skeptical, if not hostile, panel of judges, and carries it off beautifully. In part because, and this is where, like, some people didn't like this scene so much because they thought it made Littlefinger look not as intelligent as he was. But I thought that what made the scene work is the understanding of the kind of the prejudices and narratives and expectations of these three lords that you see before Sansa comes into the scene. Littlefinger, they never would have believed him on his own. And in fact, everything that happens afterwards is predicated on the belief that they are not going to believe what they're first told, that they're going to be looking for some kind of other truth.
No, actually, and I hadn't thought about it like this, but you would have made a very good literary structuralist, because you're absolutely right. Those scenes are actually diametrically opposed in the way that they're constructed. Theon is trying to convince us, an audience who wants to believe that he is really who he says he is. Sansa tries to convince an audience that's inherently skeptical of her claims that she's not who they think that she is. So it's actually almost diametrically opposed in terms of what the person is trying to tell the audience. And so that's, I mean, part of the success is it's easier to be who you really are than pretending to be. But I think you're right that it also sets up the tension with they want to hate Littlefinger, and this gives them an opportunity to do so without losing face, because all they have to do is believe Sansa.
Right, but it's also about the use of the knowledge of their prejudice that, he knows, in part, because he's grown up, he spent years and years in the Vale, that they consider, that he has foreign blood, that he's a grubby man for a grubby job. He knows that they're not going to believe whatever, they're going to assume it's a lie. So that when Sansa comes in and says, I have to tell the truth, I can't lie, that there's an automatic buy-in from those three lords. And she's beautifully playing on their emotions. She's playing on, their dislike of the Lannisters, their dislike of Tyrion, their love of Jon Arryn, their, shall we say, mild disgust with, and playing into kind of conventional understanding, right? That of course someone as plain and crazy as Lysa would be afraid of a younger woman, right? And she makes Lysa the bad guy by saying that Lysa never loved Lord Arryn, and they clearly loved Lord Arryn. And she gives them just enough of the truth about the kiss on the cheek, that they buy in, and then of course conveniently breaks down in tears, so that every cultural script that they have is saying, this girl is innocent, this girl is a victim, you can believe this. And, some people were unhappy with the scene because they thought it made Littlefinger...
And I said she marshals all of her rhetorical forces against them, and you could forgive them for crumbling before them. And I think most of the people watching the show did too. And the other thing that a lot of what I was reading about this episode they pointed out is that this is the first time anyone is like, oh, she might actually be playing the game. Like, she might have learned something from all that time with Tyrion and all this time with...
Yes, and she's clearly becoming an amazing actor. She's able to break down in tears on the spot. She's able to kind of, move them through these various changing emotional situations. But I do want to address this one criticism that I've read that I disagree with, which is that people think that this makes Littlefinger look stupid because he didn't prepare for this. And I don't think that's what's really going on in this scene. I think the tension in this scene, the reason that there's so much focus on Littlefinger's face, is that in order for this process to have worked, he clearly worked out with Sansa a good bit of the script, in terms of he's the one who would know how much they hated him, and how her breaking with him would lend her credibility in their eyes. But clearly, there was this open question of, was she going to follow along, and was she going to be convincing? Because if she basically just said, he killed Lysa, he was doomed. If she wasn't convincing, he was doomed. But I do think that the parts about Lysa being afraid of a younger woman, and the choice of when to break down in tears, and the thing about it's a peck on the cheek, that was clearly, I think, Sansa's working from her understanding of how other people see her as a young woman.
I think the only reason I would sort of withhold judgment as to how much Littlefinger knew about whether or not this was coming is that if he knew it were coming, he would have reacted exactly the same fucking way. Like, this is the most effective
Yeah, that is true.
to react for it, whether or not he knew it was coming. So if he's only like reconfiguring it in the moment, or if he had it all planned out, and she's the one who's actually the superior player at this one moment,
I think it's very much in the middle.
Yeah.
I think Sansa clearly had an independent hand in this that she's never really had before, and in either scenario had the upper hand because it was ultimately her decision whether or not to go along with him. Anyway, so moving on slightly, we then get this sort of interesting little further manipulation where now that Littlefinger has kind of put them on the back foot, made them feel bad for having, accused him of murder, he's able to find their levers again. He reminds them of Robert's rebellion against the Targaryens. He's able to marshal their prejudice against the Lannisters. He's able to say, to appeal to their prejudices about how, Lysa mishandled how she raised Robin Arryn. And so you can see them, he's already beginning to bring them inside the fold by offering them a role in the new administration. They're going to be the ones to teach Robin Arryn, how to become a Lord of the Vale.
I'm sure that's going to go over really well.
So, moving back to Meereen then.
Yes. Speaking of people learning how to become lords, it's weird that we had the earlier scene with Dany where she was being very domestic and trying to set herself up as an equal, and then we get the scene where she's being filmed in sort of Cleopatra style, very much as the superior, right? As Jorah walks in.
And, there's some interesting stuff. I mean, for one thing, we get to see Ser Barristan more active than he's been in a long time, that, he's clearly... he's getting the message from one of Varys' little birds, and he's, he just makes a decision to confront Ser Jorah ahead of time, and is the one to intervene between Jorah and Dany so that, he doesn't get a chance to make his case in private. And then I love how they did this scene because of him. She won't let herself make eye contact with him. And they're talking over each other. Not listening one to the other, that Jorah is pleading, his loyalty in her service in the sense that, he's fought for her, he's bled for her, he saved her life on numerous occasions, and she is always bringing it back to this issue of trust. And then, because that's ultimately the bottom line, is that no matter what he's done for her, the fact that he didn't tell her about this and that he violated her trust so profoundly means that there's no basis for a relationship anymore.
No, and then it's also strange because if you think about where this conversation takes place, it's the same place that Missandei and Grey Worm were speaking earlier.
Right. There was a relation of trust building.
Yeah.
And here it's being torn apart.
And then, of course, it ends with the sort of classic Kurosawa Ronin shot.
Right.
The lone knight on the horse with the big castle behind him coming towards the camera, and, lone wolf and cub very much.
Except sans cub.
Yes.
And we go from there to what some people have been describing as the Boltons' version of the Lion King, where Roose, brings the army back of the Boltons back into the north to take possession, and says, Ramsay, look, everything the light touches will be yours. And you get a sense here that for all that Roose is a treacherous bastard, he is also a treacherous Northman bastard, and that he was willing to work with the Lannisters when it served his interests, but now he's very much for the Boltons. But what's interesting about the scene is the extent to which there is a connection, but also a disconnection between father and son. On one hand, the father is finally giving his approval to the son, saying, you are forever going to be a Bolton. But at the same time, Ramsay says, I will carry on your name and your tradition. And we know from that previous scene, take it out of your pocket now, that means... So there's an interesting kind of...
You cut out for a sec. That means...
sorry, where did I leave off before?
You said, take it out of your pocket. That means...
Oh, that tradition to Ramsay means flaying people.
And what's weird is that in the previous episode, or no, maybe 2 episodes ago, he seemed to imply that there was a lot more to being a Bolton than just flaying people.
Yeah, well, and that's clearly a sort of a miscommunication or a point of tension between father and son that is just being kind of papered over at the time, at this moment. And we move from there to what I will honestly say was, and in fact, my former co-blogger Charlie Carpenter asked what the best line of dialogue in this episode was, and I responded, does Arya's laugh count? Well, hold on, you're missing a scene.
Stick with the Ramsays or the Boltons for a sec.
No. There's an interstitial scene with Sansa.
Oh yeah, that's right. Sorry.
Where Sansa is sewing a dress and Littlefinger enters to ask her this question. Why did you help me? Right? And, this is why I argue that, the tension for Littlefinger in the previous scene was about which choice Sansa would make. And here he's kind of trying to figure out why this is. And what's fascinating is how in power Sansa is in this scene compared to anything she's seen before. That, Littlefinger is trying to get her attention. He's trying to even get her to make eye contact. And by withholding that, she is exercising power over him.
Oh, and I think I think she also knows that, to put it crudely, that she's turning him on. That he's sort of felt like he's been a player in a land with no game for a while, and because even when he's questioning her, he still has that creepy smile on his face. Like he's enjoying this being.
Yeah, well, this is like. What she's figured out here is what he deeply wants, right? I mean, he's trying to pretend that there's more stuff about me than you think. But at the end of the day, what she's offering him is a vision of as I've said before, of Catelyn 2.0, but with the skills at deception and intrigue that are deeply turning him on here.
Absolutely. I don't disagree with the word
Hello?
of that. Yeah.
Sorry, you cut out there.
Oh, no, I just said I absolutely agreed with you.
You cut out there.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, and then we get to the bit where Arya's laughing. Yes, I can.
Okay, I think it's just ironic that Google cut me out when I said I absolutely agree with you. That's what people won't hear. Then we get to the bit where Arya's laughing. A lot of people claim that this scene made her look really cold and callous because they assumed that she was laughing at her aunt's death. I don't think she was.
Well, I think it's more, it's in a sense a kind of a psychological breaking point for her, right? This is now the third time at which she's come within inches of reuniting with a family member, only for that family member to die. So on one level, she's kind of laughing because, you have to almost laugh at misfortune that is this pervasive and ironic.
It's a very
every time she gets near a family member.
Right, I mean, it's a very sort of...
there's an old... there's the old phrase that, you either laugh or you go mad, and she's choosing to laugh. But people have pointed out something that I think is also accurate, which is she's also laughing at the Hound.
Absolutely. I think that's what she's mostly doing.
Yeah, because, he's been trying to ransom her for 2 seasons now?
She is the unransomable ransomable girl.
No. Yeah, well, okay, call it 1.8 seasons. But, and, by the way, people should also note that the Hound's neck is getting worse.
I mean, this is almost like a bad 80s movie, right? Like, the plot keeps going, like, I've been trying to get rid of you for how long now? And, the little kid, it's sort of an anti-Adventures in Babysitting. I mean, it's a very...
Yeah, or, it's... I was...
You were what?
I was thinking planes, trains, or automobiles.
Oh, there we go.
Kind of, you can't get rid of her. Okay, and then we get a scene in which, I think there's 2 ways to look at it. One of them is that Sansa has joined the dark side of the Force. And the other is that she's decided to cosplay as Maleficent.
I think there has to be another explanation for that. It seemed to be a very, I remember the first time that I was teaching. This would have been like 1999, before my first day of class. One of the things I did, my hair was almost down to my shoulders, and I went up there the day before class, and I got my hair cut because I'm a fucking teacher now, and I'm gonna have a teacher cut. I sort of got the same feeling with her. Like, this was a sort of rite of passage, like that needed some big thing to indicate, like, I'm a player now. I got dark hair.
Yeah. Well, and I was also thinking she's now a woman. This is very much like, kind of addressing this kind of fact that she's, found this source of power that she didn't have before. And now we move to the scene in this episode.
She went, actually, this is a Dark Willow thing. She's discovered her power, so her
she joined the dark side of the Force.
Yeah.
So then we move to the scene which I absolutely hated. The scene between Tyrion and Jaime.
I think it was clearly meant to function as an enigmatic scene. It was very meta. I felt halfway through it that this is a scene in which George R. R. Martin is almost commenting on his own propensity for...
He didn't write this episode, though.
I know he didn't, but he has, obviously he has some control over the script, but
I think he's got control over plot in the macro sense, but, there's some, I think, advanced, say over and some that he doesn't, because, I don't know, this
scene also, before I'll just get this out real quick, the story about how Game of Thrones came to be, his whole thing with the sand crabs, and how the kid who lorded over the sand crabs, that's what this thing reminded me of, except with beetles instead of sand crabs.
Yeah, I guess it's just what kind of annoyed me was that Tyrion is someone who's been set up in the books and since season 1 as someone who does have compassion for cripples, bastards, and broken things, and the imitation of a mentally challenged kinsman of his, I thought just really didn't fit with me.
Well, and some of what I read, about this, they were talking about how this is sort of his talking about the gods' perspective, not.
I get the symbolic thing they were going for, but it just didn't work for me. I found it slow and, like I said, not particularly. It didn't feel like it was actually coming from Tyrion.
I think the one thing that helps you make that case is the fact that Jaime had the exact same reaction as you did. Right? He was similarly unimpressed by whatever the fuck Tyrion was doing. So I think your reaction wasn't part orchestrated, I guess, would be one way to put it.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. And then we get the scene, the one that everyone's talking about. And it is interesting that they've shoved it all the way to the end. And, you know, in a sense, it's almost like a meta, like a meta source of tension, right? That we know the episode title, that we know what the big rising action was at the end of the last episode. You know, everyone's been waiting for 2 weeks. So we're going to put it all the way at the end and give you just 10 minutes, and it's going to be really, really fucking tense because you're just waiting for them to get.
I don't know, dude. I don't know if you saw that video of all those fucking hipsters watching the episode. They clearly
the bar?
did not know what was coming. Fucking hipsters.
No, but I meant that people knew that the fight was coming. They didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
everybody knew the fight was coming. They've been hyping it as like a boxing match. So within the structure of the episode, you're constantly feeling this tension of when are they going to get to the fight? When are they going to get to the fight? And then you get to the fight.
And it's everything we could hope
I would honestly say it's perfect. I mean, it is, I think, the most faithful in not a literal sense, but in a, although it was that, but in a kind of iconic and, you know, almost spiritual sense to that scene in the book. I mean, I really couldn't have pulled it out of my head better than they did. And, you know, that's not true for every sequence. There's always some things that are better in your head than they are in the show, just because you've got an unlimited imagination budget, and, you know, they don't. But this was just perfectly executed.
We would want much more slow-mo. There wasn't quite enough gore early enough. But yeah, no, I agree. I think it was really well done. It was set up, I think, actually way back when with Sirio and the discussion of the water dancing and the different styles of fighting, brute force versus, you know, wearing leather armor and finesse, and it was beautifully choreographed.
Yeah, and, you know, honestly, you have to give an enormous amount of credit to Pedro Pascal, who, you know, despite being a fan favorite, has gotten his fair share of critical, you know, back. He really arrived on our screens. You know, some people were complaining that he wasn't, you know, of color enough. Other people were complaining that, you know, early on in the season that he was just, you know, bisexuality and nothing else. And here he just makes the Red Viper breathe. You know, this is the man who the Red Viper was. This was the things that animated him, you know, the good and the bad of it. The you know, this burning desire for justice, but also the overconfidence and the you know,
and I mean, this would have been great if he were a prosecutor, you know, cross-examining a witness, as opposed to someone in a duel to the death with.
Well, I mean, you know, in a sense, and this is, I'm going off what some other people have known, which is, if his only intent had been to kill the Mountain and thus save Tyrion, he would have won, right? He impales Gregor, pins him to the ground, and you just step away and wait for the man to die. But
absolutely,
as he shows throughout the scene, his primary motivation throughout the whole trial, throughout really the whole season, has been to force this confession in front of Tywin, in front of the world. And because of that, he leaves himself vulnerable in that final moment.
I agree absolutely, and I was going back and forth with Amanda Marcotte about this after she posted her recap, which was basically that, in a way, the Red Viper was succeeded. Yes, he died, but he died a pragmatic death. He got what he wanted out of it. I mean, sure, he would have also probably have liked to live, but he got the confession he wanted, and he implicated Tyrion in it.
Yeah, and this is the kind of this is something that gets debated within the book fandom a lot about, did he go into this fight intending to die?
I think
And
in the show, I think the answer is clearly no. He expected to live, and that in part just because of the cockiness.
Yeah, there's the cockiness, but that's clearly, as you can see, covering this fountain of rage that, once he starts with, my sister was Elia of Dorne, say her name, who gave the order? You raped her, you murdered her children, you murdered her, just over and over and over again. That you clearly, as much as he is this kind of worldly man in love with the world, in love with all the pleasures of the world, he is also someone who for 15 years has clearly been obsessing about bringing his sister's killers to justice. And in a sense, certainly in a literary sense, speaking of his character, he has achieved his purpose and his ambition in that he has killed the man, who killed his sister and her children. He's done so in a way that implicates Tywin Lannister in the murder of children and the rape of women. And, even though, he's the one who dies first, that final shot of both of them side by side on the ground, one of them with an exploded head and the other one, with his guts, half out of his body, this is very much a double KO.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's the sort of it's almost a Western cliche of the gunfighter who goes to for revenge at all costs and isn't, which brings us right back to Kurosawa, since that's coming from there. But
I don't know if it's a Western cliche necessarily. I mean, Martin has been fairly explicit in his love of The Princess Bride.
Well, yeah.
And the debt that this plotline owes to that book and that movie. And by the way, I'm if you've never read the book but you love The Princess Bride the movie, read the end of the book, because it gives you a take that is a lot more like George R. R. Martin's take.
That's mean. Let people have their memories.
People need to share my pain.
But yeah, I mean, obviously the Inigo Montoya is right there at the end, and it points to sort of oddly, it makes the Princess Bride seem more tragic than it felt in the movie, and if you've only seen the movie, if you've read the book, but I will say I really thought this, before the season began, I thought this would have been the end of the season. I thought this is where it was all going to end. I don't
I didn't think that it would end the season. But I did think that it was going to be. I pretty much pegged which episode this would be.
I don't doubt it for a minute. I had in the back of my head. I really thought he was going to torture us until the last episode of this season with. But then again, I don't actually, look at the titles ahead of time. I'm sure if I had, I would have known this was coming a little.
No, but I even picked it ahead of knowing the titles because, I was fairly certain where Tyrion's storyline was going to begin and was going to end. And there's a certain number of beats that have to be hit, and that doesn't give a whole lot of room for when this trial had to happen.
And that's probably a good place to end on, since I think those of you who've read the book pretty much know what's coming next episode.
Yeah.
I like this idea that we've now said, I think, 3 times this season, or at least I have, that this has been the best episode of the season.
Well, I mean, honestly, I would say that season 4, at least from my perspective, with the major significant asterisk of the Cersei Jaime scene from episode 3, has been the most consistently impressive season.
And I'd agree with that wholeheartedly. And Google let you hear it that time. All right. This has been another Lawyers, Guns, and Money podcast. I'm Scott R. Kaufman.
I'm Steve Atwell.
We'll talk to you next week.
Bye.